Welcome to the Oneida County History Center and another one of our virtual programs. They've been working quite well for us. My name is Patrick Reynolds. I'm rather new here. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the History Center. As a matter of Zoom etiquette, please mute your microphones. Also note this is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, turn your camera off as well. And we're going to open up to things for questions at the end. You're welcome to put them in the chat as well. We can go through them as we see them or take care of them at the end. Next week, just doing a little plug for our program, Dr. Ben Ford, he's an underwater archaeologist, and he's going to be talking about Durham boats in Oneida Lake. Durham boats were the main, before the Erie Canal, Durham boats, as you see on the screen, were one of the main ways that people and goods were shipped across New York before the canals were really built. And they recently found one sunken in Oneida Lake, and he's going to talk to us about what's going on with that. So I hope you can join you. Tonight, we are very pleased. We have two speakers. I'm going to introduce them independently of each other. But we're going to be learning about hops, which, if you don't know, was a huge industry in central New York. This was the leading area of hop production in the nation for many years. And joining us is Matthew Urtz, Madison County historian. He was appointed county historian in April 2010. Also serves on the Cabinet of Freedom of the National Abolition Hall of Fame. He's on the board of directors of Preservation Association of Central New York. First Vice President, Region 9 Coordinator, the Association for Public Historians in New York State. Published many local regional newspapers, and he speaks about all things Madison County. And in our tonight, he's going to be talking about hops. So, Mr. Ertz, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for talking to us.
All right, good evening. Thank you for having me, Patrick and Rebecca, and the folks at the Oneida County History Center. So this is one of the more popular talks I give. I'm very happy to give it, and you're going to have a special treat with having Chad here tonight. There's nobody that's more knowledgeable in the growing of hops in central New York, and we're very lucky to have him. So I'm going to go a little bit over the history of hops, but before we can do that, you got to understand what a hop is. It's the cone-shaped female flower of the hop plant. Most commonly, they're used to flavor beer a little bit, add bitterness, and act as a little bit of a preservative. Different varieties of hops add different characteristics and flavors to the beer. That's why you hear all about the different kind of varietals of hops. Hops are perennial. They come back every year, but I'm not going to get too much in the growing of them because I'm going to let Chad do that. There is a kind of a couple of neat points with them. I'm going to talk a little bit about early harvesting of hops. So you can kind of see from this image here, hops are grown on they grow as a vine, which is a plant that follows the sun. It kind of makes a circle as it grows up, whereas a vine kind of grows straight. They grow up early on. They would use poles, and they would use rope at the top of the poles, spread them out. And when the hop was harvested, they would cut the ropes, and then the hops would be individually picked. So you can kind of see the gentleman to the side. He's standing next to a hop bale. You can see the hops in the background. It's hard to see, but you can see some of the ropes that tie up into the poles. The poles would actually be lifted and removed. The ropes would be cut at the bottom, and they would be taken over to hop pickers, which are those women on the right. Hop pickers could be anybody. This image shows women, but it was a way to get out and get into the sun and make a little bit of money by picking hops. A good hop picker could fill a box in the morning and a box in the afternoon, and that would be your goal because hops would settle after they were off the vine. Once they were harvested, they would be dried in a hop barn. You see some different types of hop barns. The one on the upper left is the Marshall Oast House. It's in the town of Stockbridge on Valley Mills Road. This is, excuse me, a more British style where the kiln would be in the bottom part of the Oast House. The top part would be where the hops lay. They would dry over an extended period of time, anywhere from 8 to 15 hours, depending on how long it took. You didn't want to dry them too rapidly. You didn't want to burn them. You can see the little window in the section on the top. Those would be to open up if it got too hot. They would then be pushed after they dried out off to the side, where they would be baled. Along the bottom one there is the Drover Hill Farm. That's what they refer to as a double pyramidal. You'll see pyramidals, singles and doubles. Same idea. The furnace that would dry them out would be somewhere in one of those two. They would be pushed to the middle for baling. And then on the upper right, you see that's a farm, the Cody Hop House in Fenner. Again, similar concept. The hops would be dried on the top. That door you see in the bottom would be how they take the bales out. So this is kind of a look at how the kiln worked. You can see in the bottom, that's the stove. It's got a pipe going up. On the second floor, you see the louvered floor. They would typically put some sort of permeable cloth, so something like canvas or something where the heat could come up fairly easily, so that the hops wouldn't fall down through. This would be, hops are very seasonal. The harvest season is late August to sometime in September. So it was a very short season, but it was a lot of long hours. That's something that's still the case today. Special shovels would be utilized to move stuff around. You can see those. The Madison County Historical Society brings them out during Hops Fest. So in Madison County, we know that there was at least a couple of breweries very early on. The more prominent one would be the Cazenovia Brewery, which, if you're familiar with the Cazenovia Public Library, it's kind of behind there. You can see it on the map in the lower right. It says Cazenovia Brewery, middle right, far right, along the Chittenango River. They produced a beer called Celebrated Cazenovia Ale. It was a very popular beer. It was shipped to Utica. It was shipped to Syracuse. At its peak, they produced about 2,000 barrels of beer a year. There was a second brewer that we know existed in Canastota. His name was Austin Brattrick. He produced about 635 barrels of beer a year. Just so you kind of know, a barrel is about 31.5 gallons. We do know that there was other breweries, but they kind of mixed together. They were distilleries and breweries. Just to give you some context, I said that Cazenovia produced 2,000 barrels. The former Empire Brewing, which is now Meyer Creek Brewing, produces about 60 barrels. Budweiser in the Syracuse area makes about 1,000 barrels. Saranac makes about 500 barrels. And those are, I believe, significantly, I believe those are a batch. Each of these is a batch of beer that they make. So hops farming came to Central New York with a guy by the name of James Coolidge. He wasn't the first person to plant them. He was, however, the first person to have a commercial hop yard. It's believed he took his initial hops from some of his neighbors' roots. We know that there was at least one other person in the town of Madison at that time who had a commercial hop yard, Solomon Root. The planning of this hop yard, according to notes, is 1808. When we say commercial hop yard, this is the first person who didn't utilize hops to produce their own beverage. It was somebody who sold it in a market. That crop grows very quickly. Solomon Coolidge, as I said, is the first person. He started shipping his hops to New York City in 1816. Root had a larger hop yard than Coolidge did. And Ezra Leland generally contributed more to what you see is what's referred to as a hop press, but Coolidge gets the credit for shipping. By 1819, the New York State Legislature actually passed a law calling for the inspection and grading of hops. So as I mentioned, when you dry out the hops, they can be burned. Also, if the hops had any illness, any blight, that could actually impact the hops. So they decided they would grade and inspect them to make sure that people were getting the highest quality hops. Oneida County's first yard that I've seen credited is a commercial hop yard is a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Wimble. In 1821, he opened a commercial hop yard in the town of Sangerfield. So you can see in this image real quick in the lower center and left, those are actually hop poles that are set up. Most even commercial hop farms in this period would be very small, 3 acres or less. It's insanely time consuming to raise and harvest hops. It's very seasonal. So in the spring, when you're training the hops and all that, that's very time consuming. And then in the fall, as I said, it's very time consuming to harvest the crop. So there were times of the year where you would need more help and might not be available. So these were typically very small farms. By 1828, Madison, Oneida, and Otsego counties were the 3 largest hop producers to the New York hop markets. The state produced about 1,263 bales of hops, which weighed about 277,000 pounds. Hops that year brought an average of approximately 10 cents a pound. This image you can see is actually in Waterville, and you can see the horses bringing in the bales to market. By 1855, hops they're now producing over 5 million pounds of hops in those 3 counties. Seagull was producing 3.1 million pounds, Madison was producing 1.3 million pounds, and Oneida was producing 600,000 pounds. And again, you can see the image of folks working in the hop fields during the day, harvesting. The image on the right, one of the things that you see pop out as hop production continues is lawsuits. There's a lot of lawsuits where a vendor might make a deal with a hop grower to purchase his hops for 25 cents a pound, and when it goes to market, it's actually 50 cents, and the hop grower tries to make a new deal, he gets sued, and vice versa. The vendor might make that same deal for 25 cents a pound, but the market drops and they're only selling for 10. He tries to back out. The hop grower is going to try and get people to honor that deal. So you start seeing a lot of lawsuits. By 1864, we're now to over 7 million pounds of production. That growth grows almost exclusively from Oneida and Madison County, who both doubled their production. And this image is kind of unique. This is an image taken from the town of Madison. We know that this was the town of Madison because it was some of the families that are part of this are still in the area today. By 1880, Madison, those 3 counties, Madison, Oneida, and Otsego County, were growing over 21 million pounds of hops. That was roughly 80% of all the hops grown in the United States were grown by those 3 counties. Some farmers, there was a brief 1 to 2 year period, some farmers were making approximately $1 a pound, so they're making a lot of money on this. Again, this is a scene from Madison, New York. You can see the hop poles in the back. They're harvesting the hops to take in and be dried out. So we'll talk a little bit about the culture. As I said, hop picking season's fairly short, mid to late August until mid to late September, depending on how they grow. Hop pickers would come from all over to take part in this. You'll see some of the ads here. You would see hop picnics. You would see hop dances that were geared towards the hop pickers. If any of you are familiar with the Solstice Hotel, this is an image of that circa probably the late 18th, early 19th century. And you can see the hops that are hanging there. That was a prime spot. You see regular dances advertised there. A lot of hop pickers lived locally, but larger hop pick operations would bring in pickers from throughout the state. Some would supply lodging, supplies, even travel, and attempt to get people to come. And it was a way to get, if you live in an urban setting, it's a way to get out into nature, maybe have a little paid vacation, for lack of a better way to put it. So this was a great opportunity and people took advantage of that. So we're at our peak, it's 1880, we're all making lots of money. We see a significant shift in people growing and planting hops. So what happens that hops go away? And I love this image because everybody's looking off in the distance as if they see the crash coming. So there's a lot of issues that are regularly given for the failures of hops. You know, prohibition, the market's shifting. The reality is it was a whole bunch of factors that take part. One was mildew, the downy mildew, which is still common, insects, development of hops in the western state, and prohibition. All sorts of different things kind of play their role. In 1899, we produced over 17 million pounds of hops, but we're only making 10.5 cents, which is down 90 cents from the peak. And farmers are very intelligent people. And if they can't make money on a crop, they're absolutely going to get out of that crop. So just 10 years later, we've cut that in half. So we're producing just a little over 8.5 million pounds. They're bringing in 30 cents a pound. However, that's not enough to sustain farmers. So farmers start switching and moving away from hops and producing things that will actually make them money. One of the problems the growers in the Northeast faced that didn't impact the Northwest quite as much was the downy and white powder mildews. They severely impact the hops early growing season. So you see some examples of downy mildew. You can see how if that got into your vines, it would cause significant issues. It would lower the grade. You're not making as much money on the hops. That can be a catastrophic loss to a farmer. 1899, New York is still the largest hop producer in the US. By 1909, we were third to Oregon and California. Their weather cycles are a little different than ours and make it a little nicer. They also grow hops in a different method. So you see this is the trellis method, which is the more common way it's done today, although you will see the poles a little bit still in certain places. And they were also profitable with it cheaper. They had a labor force that was a little less costly than it was in New York State. They were producing profitable hops for about a dime, 15 cents less a pound. So if you can do that, you know, you're going to put the market that's a little more effective out of business. And the final death nail was, of course, Prohibition. Prohibition existed from 1919 to 1933. It didn't completely kill the commercial hop. We did have a couple that lasted, but for the most part, everybody left. Some hop growers were able to ship hops to places like Germany, but they almost exclusively grew their own, so that wasn't a market. And there is a market for some other things that can be used for a couple of other things, preservative, and it does help inflammatory issues. But for the most part, that was the end. The last commercial hop farm ends in 1950. It was, I believe, in the town of Lenox. The hop for the next roughly 50 years almost, the market to the west is far more productive. Northeast hops transition to other crops, and hops just kind of go away in central New York in the sense commercially. As I said, they're a perennial, so you would still see them growing up around poles and different things, but you didn't see them on a commercial level. So what causes the rebirth of hops in central New York? And similar to the death, the rebirth comes about from a number of different things. And it varies, but societal changes. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to the Madison County Hop Festival. That was launched in the mid-90s. The Northeast Hop Alliance forms, and then the commercial viability. If farmers can make money on the crop, they'll do that. And farmers found that in some cases they could. So to start with, the example I give a lot of people is in an era of commercial farms, hormone pumped animals with pink slime, people started paying attention to what they were putting in their bodies. Demand for higher products across the board led to astronomical growth in craft brewing. The other thing that led to astronomical growth in craft brewing was the many, many uncles and brothers and friends that started putzing in the late 80s and early 90s with home brewing kits, found that they enjoyed it. And while I had family members that tried it and made terrible beer, a lot of folks got good at making beer, and those folks moved it into a business aspect. And that's across the board. That's why we have tons and tons of farmer markets today, why we have stuff like organic, and we pay way more attention to what goes into the, if you're a meat eater, what goes into the meat that you eat. That all kind of played the same role with beer. In 1996, Madison County launched the first Hop Fest with the idea of celebrating the hops heritage in Madison County. Each year, this event honors an individual for their work done to promote the hops industry and history as the hop king and or queen. So you see some pretty prominent people here, Assemblyman Bill McGee. There's Kate Fisher of Foothill Farms in Munsville, who was instrumental in the rebirth of hops. Carl Stearns, the architect, who has been instrumental in saving a lot of the hop things. And then Steve Miller, who we'll talk about in a second, was our first hop specialist in central New York. The Northeast Hop Alliance forms in 2001 with the possibility that they could have a niche market that existed that would utilize locally grown hops from places that have a historic background in the industry. It worked down the eastern seaboard, so from Maine, I believe, down to Maryland. It might have spread since then. But the idea behind it was they would work to help farmers get off the ground and be able to hopefully make money while they're growing hops. In 2001, Foothill Farms of Munsville became the first farm since the 1950s to plant and grow hops on a commercial level. Larry and Kate have become leaders in the redevelopment of the hop industry. You can see their farm if you drive right down Route 46 in the Munsville area. Depending on what way you're going, it's on the east side of the road. And they have a little brewery now that you can go in, have a drink or two, and they'll tell you all the stories. And on the right day, they'll probably take you out and show you if you ask them. But they're really great people. And I would encourage you, if you've never gone there, to check it out. In 2011, the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Madison County actually hired a hop specialist, Steve Miller. He held the role until 2018 when he left to head up the Northeast Hop Alliance. Steve was a great resource for farmers, helping them out. Not just commercial folks that were doing it commercially, but folks that just wanted to try it on their own property and see how it worked. There were a lot of folks who joined the hop growing movement and realized very quickly it's very, very difficult and it's a lot of work. So there's not quite as many as there were before, but the folks that have survived have done pretty well for themselves. In 2010, New York State had 35 acres of hops planted throughout the state. In 2017, there was almost 10 times that, roughly 322. Acres of hops were planted, producing almost 100,000 pounds of hops. So not quite what we were at our height, but significantly more than we were just 7 years prior. These are just some of the farms that are growing hops on some level of commercial. Chad's going to talk from the Bineyard in just a second, but you see some of the other ones. Critz Farms has a small field you see on going south on the road from Cazenovia, the village, to Woodstock. All sorts of different ones, and there's more that are popping up and going away at the same time. That when I up this, they do this list every few years. There's typically a lot that aren't there anymore, but a lot of new ones that are trying different things. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Patrick to introduce Chad from the Bineyard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ertz. Incredibly big story. I was one of those guys that was growing hops in 1993 in New York and brewing my own home brew. And so recently I got to meet our next speaker, Mr. Chad Meigs. He's over 27 years of business experience in the software industry, most recently the agricultural business sector. He's the founder and chief operations officer at the Bineyard, which is a full-scale hop farm and processing facility. It's an organization that leads in resurrecting the hop industry in New York. So if Chad is with us, you can start sharing your screens. He was just here.
Yep,
Excellent.
I'm still here.
We got you. Hello, Chad.
Hello, Patrick. Thank you for having me today. This is awesome. I've seen Matt's presentation a couple times now, and it never ceases to amaze me how people did it back then. It's pretty cool seeing how well they did that. To put this into a little bit of a perspective, it takes one person about 1 hour to pick one vine, and so you can just imagine with the amount of hops they had back then, how many people that they actually needed to pick an entire, acre or acres worth of hops. Where today, when I get into my presentation, you can kind of see the equipment we use today. That it's just the harvester we have does 170 vines in 1 hour. So I tend to say it's 170 people power, but it's pretty cool to see that. So thank you for that, Matt. That was very cool. So what I kind of presented, what I have for you guys today is just kind of what people do in this day and age to, harvest and grow this amazing crop. We are on a pretty small scale. The vineyard is, it's about 4 acres here on our farm in Cazenovia, and we do harvest some farms in the area as well. So we're usually somewhere around 8 acres or so. And that, on the scheme of things, is pretty small compared to a lot of the large farms that you see out in the Pacific Northwest. They're on the thousands of acres scale. So we're still pretty small, but we do have some pretty cool tools in our toolbox to help us do the growing and the picking. So this presentation is just basically a photo essay. So I'll stop talking and get into it here. But right around this time of season, you get out and start doing your strings. So I don't know if you guys can see this picture, not at all, but there's a lot of strings. There's about 2 to each plant. So instead of, back in the day, they had one pole. It was almost like a Christmas tree with the plants around that pole. Now we do them in a row on a trellis, so you can kind of see the strings coming down there. So these are the kinds of things we are doing right now, is throwing these strings down and getting ready for the season. This next thing I have is a video, and I really hope it works for people. I think Patrick actually took this video. This is of me stringing, and I got the 2-hand technique going here. So let's see if it actually loads. Please load. But this is how we do it. So we have a big tower. There it is. We have a big tower, and you just take each individual string and tie it to the top, and then someone comes along behind it and anchors it down into the ground. So it's a very labor intensive process still, but that's how it's done these days. The guys out in the Pacific Northwest do a lot of this, but their wagons are probably about 10 times the size of ours, and they probably have about 5 or 6 people on top of it, and they can string pretty quickly. But it is
Chad,
still, yes.
The video was lagging. You could tell what was going on, but I was just wanted to underscore you're 24 feet up in the air and you're tying 2 knots.
The trellis is 18 feet.
Okay, but you're tying 2 strings with 2 hands at the same time, and it's an amazing thing to do. How long did it take you to learn how to do that?
Took me a good 3 or 4 seasons to figure that out, and it was really just watch one hand do it and then watch the other hand do it and then try to do it in tandem. So I finally got it down. It's pretty hard to do. You got to see out of your peripheral vision, but yeah, it makes it twice as fast, and it is hard to do, but it is fun. Stringing is fun. I'm getting very excited to start tying them up. Next, now you have all the strings down on the ground. So the next thing you need to do is training. And here's a little thing that you're just basically needing to show the string or the hop where the string is. So you have to manually go through and show. A lot of it will kind of train themselves, but you got to go through and string them up just like this. To put this in a little perspective, we have 3,700 hills on our farm here. So each hill has 2 strings coming into it. So you have to do this a lot. So again, a lot of manual labor. This is another tool that we have that we didn't have back in the day. This is an air blast sprayer. One of the modern advancements, and really this is just to apply pesticides. As Matthew said in his presentation, one of the main reasons this left New York State here was mildew. So this is one of the tools in the toolbox we can use to battle the mildew. We still do see mildew a lot around here, so something like this air blast sprayer is essential. If you don't have something like this, you will see mildew. It will affect your yield. So a tool like this is much needed. Here is another tool they didn't have back in the day. This is our tractor, and if you see that little implement there in the middle of it, what that does is it kind of hills up on the sides of the hop. So if you look down the hop rows in the back of the tractor, you can see how there was a little bit of a till. This is an organic way to control weeds. So we drive the tractor down and we toss dirt up onto the hills there, and that suppresses weeds, and it takes care of a lot of issues. So you don't have to go in and do a lot of spraying for things like that. We try to be as organic as possible. A lot of tools like this came over from Germany. We learned how to do this from the Germans, and the Germans really perfected the small scale growing. In the Pacific Northwest, they don't do things like this. Pretty much everything is chemically controlled. So I really try to take advantage of being on a small scale and trying to do things a little more organically, a little more earth friendly. And this is definitely one of the big tools that we use that we utilize here. I wanted to throw this slide in, and this is a image from Stonehenge, and basically the summer solstice. The summer solstice is a very important time in hop growing. The beginning of the season, it's really in their vegetative stages. The hops are really trying to get up to the top of the trellis as fast as they can. You want to try to hit that top wire right around the summer solstice. The hops actually recognize that the days are starting to get shorter, and they go from their growth stage into their vegetative stage, and then they start to grow out. So if you guys can see, but behind me, I'm not actually in my hop yard right now. That is a background image, but the yard will look like that after the summer solstice, after the plants start to fill out. So first they get up and they're very thin, and then after the summer solstice, they start to grow out. So that's a very important time of year for us. And then, after the summer solstice, you kind of have a little bit of a, growth stage in there. You wait till the hops grow out, and then comes harvest. So here's a picture of us harvesting. This still pretty manual. You have to go and you grab one bind at a time. If we were a little bigger of a farm, they actually have some picking wagons now that you can go down and it'll actually pick the hops automatically for you. But unfortunately, we don't have the capital for that right now. So we pull each bind by hand. So you go through at the bottom, you actually cut it with some scissors or some with a cutter, and then you yank the bind down. One person on the back grabs the top of it, the other the front, and then we throw it on this wagon. This wagon can fit probably one row, and as Patrick knows, as he's been to our farm, this wagon can probably get up to 10 feet high, full of hops. Oh yes, I did include a picture. So there's the wagon completely
Holy moly.
covered in hops. There's a lot there. That probably took about an hour to an hour and a half to pick all of that and put it into the wagon, and it'll take another 2 to 3 hours to actually run it through the harvester itself. This is the harvester itself. This is a Wolf harvester. This came over from Germany, and if you notice a trend here, we get a lot of our tips, a lot of our things from how the Germans did. This unit itself was built in 1974, and as I mentioned, it picks about 170 binds an hour. So to put that in perspective, if this was back in the day, that would take 170 people 1 hour to pick what this machine can do. So it saves a lot of time, and it's really been the cornerstone of our business. If it wasn't for this thing, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. But it weighs about 5.5 tons, and it's pretty cool. I got a few more pictures of it here. This is a picture of me loading. So you basically take the bottoms of each of the binds and you load it into the arm. The binds are actually kind of pinned against that arm that I have my hand on there, and it's brought into the machine. The machine does a bunch of sorting through conveyor belts and air drives, where it will, I forgot about this. So this is just a typical day of us, doing a harvest. You see a bunch of people there in the middle, hovered around. Those are the clean hops coming out, and I have a video of the clean hops coming out. Hopefully that worked a little better. Hopefully it will work a little better than the first one, but the clean hops come out and we put them into some of those bins, and then the bins go into the dryer. But in the background there, you can see a wagon pulled up and people are pulling the hop binds off the wagon and putting them into the machine. Hopefully this one works a little better, so we'll give this one a go. I think this one has some music to it, so I'm gonna pause here. So that's kind of typically what you see coming out. It's pretty amazing that you can put that massive bind into this, and this machine will kick out cones like that. So it's really advantageous to have something like this. Anyone on a commercial scale that doesn't have not necessarily this machine here, but mechanical type of picking, it's not really feasible. When we first started, we were at a 1/4 acre, and it took us weeks to pick it all. So something like this is definitely needed. Once it's all picked, it goes into the dryer, and it was hard for me to take a picture of this, but this is basically a big room. Everything in this room is humidity controlled, and there are basically big fans underneath it that are pulling air down through it. So it's a little smaller than those big Oast barns that Matthew was showing us, but this really requires just really big fans moving a lot of air. And one of the advantages that we have over the Pacific Northwest, because we are on such a smaller scale, is that we can dry these with air and just dehumidification alone, where they use a lot of heat out in the Pacific Northwest. So that's one of the advantages we actually have at growing at a smaller scale. What that does is it creates an environment where a lot of the oils of the hops don't evaporate off. So you actually get a higher quality product. So we are able to charge a premium for our hops just because we're on a smaller scale, and we can caress them and love them a little more than that than they do on a large scale out in the Pacific Northwest. And then finally is the pelletization process. You basically just put it through you beat the hops up into a pulp, a powder, and then you force them through a die, and then they make these little pellets. Breweries like these pellets because they don't gum up their equipment, their brewing equipment. They don't cause havoc on their filters and things like that. So this is the end product that the breweries want to see. And that's really it. I'm not really sure how I'm doing here on time, but thanks for having me. That's some of my contact information there if anyone wants to get a hold of me and chat more about hops.
Chad, thank you very much. I was wondering if with the changing, the global warming stuff going on, is the pests changing, like the spotted lanternfly or anything coming?
Yeah, so I've been doing this now for about 10 years. And I've really noticed there hasn't been a typical season in those 10 years. For instance, this season is very early. Spring came really early, and our hops are larger now than they ever have been at this time of year. So we're going to have to do some cutting back. Things like the spotted lanternfly now finding their way into yards. It just seems to be, weather events are completely changing now where, we'll have rain for a week straight where the yard gets flooded. Hops do not like to be, they like a lot of water, but they don't like to be flooded. Or last season, I think it didn't rain for almost a month. And if we didn't have irrigation, we would have been screwed. So climate change is definitely a thing, and it definitely affects crops. I never really realized this before I was actually farming, but it is a thing, and it is something that we all need to be concerned about.
So we got a question in the chat asking why some hop farmers are going out of business when the brewery industry is still going strong.
So that it's really hard to grow hops.
Yep.
Uh, so when I first got into this, to be quite honest, I didn't know any better. And I didn't, if I knew how hard it was, maybe I wouldn't have done this. I don't know, but it's really hard to grow hops on a commercial scale. If your hops don't look like the ones in this picture behind me, you are not going to make money. If it's anyone can grow hops, you can put them in the ground and they will grow up. But in order to get the amount of yields that you need to make some money from, you need to do everything right. And it requires watering them at the right times. It requires fertilizing them at the right times. It requires cultivating with that tractor. It requires having a picking machine like those pictures I showed you. It requires drying them correctly. There are so many factors. There's so much, so it's very capital intensive. And if you don't have all those or have access to someone that does, it's not really feasible. So when hops started coming back, people were planting, 1 acre of hops here, 2 acres of hops there, and they found that they were putting in a lot of time and effort for a hobby, and they weren't necessarily making money off of it, so they started going away. The larger operations, and I don't really consider ourselves that large, but if you have those economies of scale, it starts to make more sense.
Got another question. They're asking what you do with the chaff and the junk lines that come out the back of the machine. Are you composting them, or what are you doing with them?
Yep, there's a lot of compost. There's a lot of green matter that comes off that. In the back of that harvester, it actually will chop it up for you into little tiny pieces. All the leaves and the stems goes down into a big compost. Right now, we don't bring that back out onto our hop yard. We actually do some custom harvesting for other farms. And I'm not really sure if, disease or viruses are in any of that. We are eventually going to get that a handle on that and end up bringing that compost back out and putting it back onto the hops. But all of it right now just gets compost. We have a really large compost heap.
So someone's asking about hedgerow and hops that in this area, people find hops on their property. Is there any value
all
in
the
that?
time?
Yeah, is
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Matthew talked a little about the Northeast Hop Alliance. That organization, as well as Hop Growers of New York, and you can kind of think of those as the same thing. But we have a feral hops project. We're looking to find some of those. So if any of you guys have hops on your property and you want to know more about them, definitely reach out to me, and I can help you there. But people find hedgerow hops all the time. Going through Matthew's slides there, you can see the amount of hops that were around here. A lot of them, because they're so hops are almost invasive. So once they get established, it's really hard to get rid of them. So they end up in a hedgerow, and then the field itself is moved into corn or something like that. Those hops have remained in the hedgerow for 100 years after someone tried to kill them. Weather, no sun, and they're still around. So those hops are tried, true, and tested, and there is definitely value to them, especially when it comes to breeding. If you're able to take those qualities from those hops and breed them into something else, there is a lot of value there.
I believe, Chad, you might be able to speak better on this, but I believe there is what they call a this area centric hop that was found, I want to say in the Munsville area, called the Clark hop. The guy who would know more about that is Norm Dan. But I believe when I first started doing this presentation, there was a little bit written about the Clark hop, which was one of those that was found in a hedgerow and that was somewhat unique to Central New York.
Yeah, so the USDA has actually given us the green light. If you find a hop, you have to get a DNA test for it. If it turns out to be a unique variety, meaning the DNA for that particular hop doesn't match an already existing hop that's already on the open market, you can trademark it. So that particular farm probably chose that name and they trademarked it. We actually found a hop on our property, and it turned out to be a unique DNA sample. It had some ancestry of Canadian red vine, I believe, but it had some brewing characteristics of almost like a tropical fruit, which is super sexy to brewers these days. So we're gonna propagate that out and probably trademark that ourselves. So you're gonna see a lot more of that in the very near future. Is people and this is all coming from that program I just mentioned, that feral hop program is just teaching us all of us growers how to do this, how to make some money off of these hedgerow hops. It's pretty exciting.
So somebody's asking, why Madison, Oneida, and not Seagull County and not the Finger Lakes or Western New York? Is it the same growing conditions, or is it this, we're kind of in this.
It is. Matt might be able to speak of the history of this. I don't know what it was like back in the day, but what I know, New York is such a diverse environment around here, and there are some areas that do very well and other areas that do not. Hops like more of a sandy loam. Our soil here, we have a little bit more clay, and it really depends on your growing area. So if you have super clay soil that's not well drained, that hops will probably not do well there. If you have more of that sandy soil, hops will do well there, but you're going to need to throw a ton of irrigation at it. So it probably really matters your site. I don't really think it's too much of geography. I do know some growers in the Finger Lakes and in the southern tier region. The only area in New York State that I don't think there are any hop farms would be up in the Adirondacks.
Right. So
I'm going to take a stab in the dark and say the property value has something to do with that too, because most of those vineyards are actually physically on one of the lakes, and you probably have to make a lot of money to pay the taxes and that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure that hop growing is going to be conducive to that at this point. Whereas having a big old winery on the lake, you draw on a lot of agritourism folks, and that might be another reason why you don't see it quite so much.
Great.
Agritourism.
Yeah. So you got at least one more question here. Fiona asks, can I grow a vine on an 8-foot trellis on a porch, and how do I site them?
Absolutely. People do that all the time. People come by our farm and get rhizomes all the time. If you'd like some rhizomes, please reach out. A rhizome is just a piece of root. If you get a little piece of rootstock, you put it in the ground, and it will grow pretty much anywhere. I will have to warn you, over the years, if 5 years later, it will take over wherever you put it. So you're going to have to cut it back ever so often. But they're great crops. They're very beautiful, and then when the cones come out, they just smell awesome. So I see people putting them up on like pergolas. Some people grow them up on the sides of their decks. People use them as green barriers. They're very good for things like that. And it's just a very cool looking, wonderful smelling plant. So absolutely.
So I know after they're processed, Ted, you get them analyzed for their characteristics. Somebody's asking, are you discovering any flavor characteristics of Central New York hops that are equal or superior to the West Coast hops, which often are touted with so much?
That's a good question. And I think that's kind of getting into the realm of terroir, which was originally for the grape and wine industry, where flavor is different for region. There are a lot of factors that go into what makes a hop a hop, harvest timing being one of them. But I firmly believe that terroir is a real thing. There is major differences in some varieties that are grown here in New York State than out in the Pacific Northwest. Chinook and Cascade are probably two good examples of something out in the Pacific Northwest. The Cascade is more grapefruity, a little more citrusy. Here, it's a little more earthy. So if you're a brewer and you know that, then you can accommodate accordingly. Another one that we grow here, a variety called Galena. From the Pacific Northwest, it's really just a bittering hop, which means you just use it for its bittering qualities and not for the aromatics of the hop. The Galena that's grown here in New York people use it as an aroma hop all the time, and they're just starting to discover this now. So terroir is a real thing, and there are definitely distinctive features for New York that would be greater than or superior than the Pacific Northwest, and vice versa too. So that they have some varieties that do better out there. One of the cool things is the USDA is starting to recognize regions outside of the Pacific Northwest, and we actually might be getting some trial varieties here in New York State to see how well they do. So we're on the radar of the big boys, and I see New York only growing in popularity.
So how many breweries do you sell your hops to in a year? Roughly.
Oh, geez. So in New York State, there's approximately, I think there's about 380 of them now. We sell maybe to 80 of them. So we're not the biggest hop farm, but we're all over the place. We sell most to breweries around central New York, but we do have some clients in Buffalo. We have some breweries down. We have a bunch of breweries down in Brooklyn area. We've sold hops as far as Florida.